Hey guys, welcome to the Break the Chain podcast. I'm here today with Katelyn Townsend. Katelyn is the founder of the Abraham's Fortune Wellness Centre. She's a student of theology. She's a life coach practitioner. She's qualified in psychology and sociology, and she obtained her master's with a concentration in theology. I just want to say I've got so much respect for Katelyn for coming on the podcast today. She's a survivor of sexual abuse, and some of the things that we talk about today are heavy, so just brace yourself. Hi Katelyn, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's really cool to have you here. So you're a life coach practitioner, and you've dedicated your life to helping other people. Can you tell me why you chose to do that?
Yeah, so how I became a life coach is kind of an interesting story. So I had like a really rough upbringing, and I've been through a lot of stuff. Like I went through sexual assault as a young kid, and my parents got divorced as well, which was kind of hard in the family. And then my brother ended up having a lot of mental health issues when he hit high school. And as we were kind of like working through this and trying to get the help that we wanted for him as well as for ourselves, because it was a lot to deal with, I always was left feeling like I wanted more. So with counseling situations, counseling's really helpful for healing like past wounds, but what would end up happening is I would kind of get to that place where I was comfortable with stuff that had happened in the past, and I was okay with where I was, but it was like, where to now? Where do I go from here? And counselors, they're not really trained in that piece because that's not their area of expertise. So they were kind of left like, well, I can't help you anymore. And I was always left feeling like there was a missing piece, or like I was just left to my own devices at that point, but I didn't know what to do. So when I found out about life coaching, I really liked that element of the forward movement and creating a positive future. And it's kind of that you're comfortable with the past now, so where do you go next? And what do you do from here on out? So I really liked that piece. And what ended up happening was my first year of university, my brother ended up in and out of the hospital with his mental health issues. And then he eventually ended up we had to kick him out of the house. It was a hard decision to make, but it was getting too dangerous for us. And so he was out on his own, and he eventually ended up in jail for first-degree murder. So it kind of shook the family, and I was actually taking a psychology degree to become a counselor initially. And at that point, I actually stepped back for a semester and stopped taking my psych courses, and I was just kind of like, I don't know if I can do this, because it's everything going on in my personal life, and then having to help other people through their really difficult stuff, counseling as well. And it just felt too overwhelming at the time. So I really stepped back and was like, I can't do this career and personal. Like I need a space where it's just safe to just process and not have all that overwhelm. So I ended up taking a semester off, but then as I worked through some of that stuff, I really noticed, I guess, like an inner strength that some people don't always have when they go through those things. And I was just like, I don't want to waste this. Like, I want to help other people. But counseling felt so, and it's great. Like, I have nothing against counseling, and counseling is fantastic. I've worked alongside a lot of counselors in terms of referrals and that as well. But it always left me feeling like, what's that next step? So I didn't want to become a counselor because I didn't want to leave people feeling with what's that next step for them. And I wanted to take them into that next step. So I found out about coaching shortly after that. And as soon as I graduated, I went and I got my coaching certificate. And that's how I kind of became a coach. And I really like the way of moving forward and not just leaving people with that question of, well, what do I do now that I'm comfortable with things? Like, where do I go from here? And actually helping lead people through that.
I can relate to that. I feel like sometimes that the what's next is part of the now being okay in a way, because like having a sense of purpose and meaning that drives you forward, being like, this is kind of like having a vision. Is that, I don't know if that would be the right way to kind of describe it. I mean, how would you say that helps with what you teach people and yourself?
Yeah, so a lot of people will come in not knowing what their vision is and not knowing where to go. So kind of helping them not so much like I wouldn't say I give them vision, but like helping them unearth what their vision is and where they want to go, and like finding that sense of purpose and deeper meaning, and how they can use their past to their advantage, because we've all been through crap. Like every one of us has been through something. It's just a matter of what that something is. So rather than saying, like, there's so much in our society where sometimes we like fake this normal, and oh, I just want to be normal having gone through all that. But it's with life coaching, it's how do you take that and bring purpose out of what you've been through, and create a sense of mission with that going forward.
Yeah. I mean, let's get set like more of a scene with your story. At the start, I've kind of warned people that there's going to be things that we're going to speak about in this that are probably not going to be that comfortable for some people to hear, but because you've already told me, and it is, I find it heavy to hear,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's so important because obviously it's like not unusual. So I mean, if we start at the start with your like early childhood, can you explain what happened?
Yeah, so I was actually assaulted by a number of individuals. Some went to jail, and some some not so much. But so my first sexual experience was actually when I was only 3 years old, which is fairly young, but also unfortunately not that uncommon. Especially in North America. I don't know what the stats are like elsewhere in the world, but in North America, I believe it's 1 in 4 females by the time they're 16 will have been assaulted in some way, shape, or form. So my first sexual experience was when I was 3, and that one was just kind of a not very regular thing. But then we actually had someone living with us who was renting from our house, and he ended up going to jail, and that one was for actually a couple of years that it went on for. So being that young and not really understanding the idea of what love is to begin with, and like in terms of platonic love even, and romance and sexual love, and it just gets all meshed together, and it's really confusing, especially at that young of an age. So I ended up actually having sexual addiction for a while, because it was the norm to me. Like that's how you relate with males. So I didn't really know any other way, and that kind of came with me into my adulthood for the first couple of years of early adulthood as well. And it was something that I struggled with for a really long time, because it was like, it's how you relate to males, and obviously it's not a healthy way, but like in my mind, being 3 years old that the first incident happened, like that was my quote unquote normal. Like I thought that that's how males and females related to each other, and not knowing like where those boundaries are of what a healthy friendship with a male looks like. It was really, really heavy for a lot of years. And I think it's still something that there are small pieces that I'm still working through with that, but having to come through that really shaped me as an individual. And I think a lot of positives came out of it, having to work through all that, but just the amount of confusion and shame. And then in my case, the second individual, like most of my memories are me actually initiating things, which of course I was underage, it was illegal, he shouldn't have been doing it or engaging in it. But like from my end, and I didn't understand at that point that relationships had that risk, like you could get cheated on or those things as well. So I was too young to be in a relationship, but from my perspective, it was more quote unquote consensual than the previous assault, but obviously still wrong. But being young and thinking you love someone, and I would still argue that part of me did, and obviously his side was illegal and wrong and probably not real love, but like from my end, being this 6-7-year-old kid, that was like real to me. So then having to navigate like, well, what is love, and what is a healthy expression of love, because obviously that's a really unhealthy form of love at that age. So yeah, there's just like this sense of shame, this sense of guilt. And even still now, like if I start to have feelings for someone, like I still feel it feels wrong, and I have this sense of guilt about it because of how people responded to what was happening afterwards, and being told like, well, that was wrong. And obviously, again, it was wrong. I was underage. He should not have been doing it. Um, Especially with all this like child human trafficking stuff that's in the media right now. Like, I want to stress that I am not, like, that is not okay. It's never okay. But from my end, the child, to feel like you love someone and then being told that that is wrong, and not having people tease apart what elements of it were wrong and what elements of it were okay, like to tease through those emotions is just uh, really difficult. And there's a large sense of shame. You feel like you did something wrong, even though as a child, obviously I was not the one in the wrong. I didn't really know. um, so living with that shame and that confusion, and just having to tease all that apart because it's all been kind of meshed together, was a struggle for many years.
I mean, I don't feel like I started to get any grasp of right or wrong until a few years ago. When I wasn't at 18, I don't think I had any grasp of right or wrong, even at 18. I think even
Hmm.
18's too young to make any choices or realizations about what love is. I mean, that's elusive for
Yeah.
anyone. And when you're getting that attention and affection from someone when you're super young, obviously that's incredibly desirable, isn't it? I mean, some people,
Hmm.
like, you just crave attention, and when you're, I
Yeah.
think, below the age of 5, you don't even have the brain architecture to understand the difference between anything. It's just kind of like all you need is affection, but below the age of 5. So if you're getting or receiving it in a certain way, that's gonna totally be normal, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I mean, I know we spoke last time, and I actually googled it at the time, and it just blew me out completely, because I think we found out that 1 in 3 women is sexually assaulted, and 1 in 4 men. Now,
Mm.
that's more than 25% of people, which
Yeah.
leads me back to this element of shame, and it seems like the shame isn't related to what happened. It's actually related to judgment from other people,
Hmm. Yeah,
which
exactly. And
is,
it's
yeah.
there's so there's this thing called secondary wounding, which I've learned a lot about because I've been in and out of counseling for this basically my whole life, like since I was a child, at different seasons. And secondary wounding is when, so the initial event will create some effect on you, whether it's good or bad, or how you respond to the initial assault. And everyone responds differently. Some women, the actual assault is what wounds them, but for me, it was definitely the secondary wounding. So what that is how people in your environment respond to the event and what they tell you about the event, or like their interpretations of the event. So like for me, I had to go, because it was a court case as well. I actually had to go get interrogated by the police the first time, and I actually lied my ass off the first time and completely was like, "Oh yeah, nothing's happening." And for a lot of kids in that scenario, they lie because they think they're going to get in trouble. For me, I distinctly remember lying because I didn't want it to stop, because I was getting that attention and the affection that I wasn't finding in some of the other adult relationships in my life at the time. So I didn't want it to stop, which is that's not really a normal response that most kids have when this is going on, but for me, that's what it was. So they didn't believe my story, and I had to go in for a second period of questioning. And I remember feeling like I was going to get in trouble if I lied about it from the police. So I was actually more afraid of the police than my abuser, which is a unique situation in and of itself.
Is
So
it?
I actually,
Is it definitely? I mean, you've done probably way more research into this than any. Okay, I was using normal here as, like, I guess, like, common, but, like, does anyone who's not experienced that know, or ever? Because I haven't done any research into it, but I presume that you have researched what a normal response is to that. I mean, is it a normal response? Because I didn't know. Like, I thought maybe 1 in 100 people had to suffer from this, but 25%, more than 25%, I'm just, just like, and
yeah,
I'll just start by saying thank you for talking about this, because most people won't. I
Yeah.
through doing break.
And it's something that needs to be brought to the light, though. And if our society keeps not talking about it, then nothing's ever going to change, or no one's going to be able to break that cycle, right? Because it keeps getting swept under the rug. So it needs to be talked about, even though it is difficult and hard for people to hear and to like discuss as well on my end. It's not like the easiest thing to talk about, but I do feel like it's worth I guess the risks of talking about it. But yeah, so I'm not sure, like I haven't done so much research on how kids respond to like the police. I know research shows that a lot of children feel like they're going to get in trouble if they tell what happened. But again, this is research that how do you know what's going on in a kid's mind? I don't really know how they come to those conclusions. So it depends what research you're looking at, how they approach the topic and whatnot. From my own experience talking with women and some men who have been through this, from the most part, they want their accusers to go to jail. Or sorry, not their accusers. They want their perpetrators to go to jail. So that's the norm from like kind of my own, I don't know if it's research, but just from collections of talking with people. So that's why I feel like my response was so abnormal, is just from what I've heard from other people who have been through it. But I don't know in terms of like the research if there are more people out there. But yeah, I definitely felt like I had to tell the cops or I was going to be in trouble. So I almost feel like I threw him under the bus to be like, well, he can be the one to get in trouble, which I know is not the case. And obviously as a kid, I did the right thing because I was protecting other kids from having that same experience. But at the time, being a kid and not understanding all that, all I knew was if I tell the truth, it's going to stop, and I don't want it to stop. But if I'm going to get in trouble or we both get in trouble, I'd rather just throw him under the bus and not be the one to get in trouble. So it's kind of like what was going through my mind at the time.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear that perspective. But a child can never be in any way held responsible for that at that age, with knowing absolutely nothing better. I mean, that's just an absolute no-brainer. But like I say, it's really interesting, and it makes complete sense. It makes sense because you don't know right and wrong. You don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know, and an adult should know better. But I mean, let's talk about the effects that had on you as you got older.
Yeah, so I ended up like, especially like in my situation growing up, I wasn't getting a lot of adult attention in other places. So it was, I found like, I ended up really addicted to like masturbation and sexual activity on my own because it was like a comforting tool. It was a way of numbing what was going on, and the fact that that individual was no longer in my life. I wasn't getting attention from other people. So it was like a sense of comfort, a numbing tool, and it just became this overwhelming, like I would skip school to stay home and masturbate, and I would fake sick because obviously I'm too young at that age to just skip, but like I would fake sick to do this, and that went well into my teen years, and just like it's really, I feel like it's easy for women to hide that kind of addiction. So for me, nobody really knew about it nobody knew that it was going on, but it was like all consuming in my thoughts, in my life, and in like it was very all consuming. And I remember actually in grade 12 doing, so yeah, that started when I was like 7 or 8, so very young. And then I would say it was kind of like not so much, it was a tool for comfort at that point, and didn't become an addiction until I was probably 10, 11, 12, around that age. And that's when it became like a full-fledged, like I didn't have control over it. I needed to be doing it, or like I didn't have full control over it at that point. But then I worked on kind of overcoming that in my teen years, so during high school for a bit. And I would say that I had kind of gotten it quote unquote under control, because how much control do you really ever have over an addiction? But like it was more part of life than all of life. And I remember in grade 12 doing a presentation on pornography addiction, and people like laughing at me because the kids are like, oh, that doesn't happen. And I'm like no, like this is this is a real thing, and it like impacts your relationships, especially because initially I wanted to be a marriage counselor. So in grade 11 and 12, I started reading a lot of like marriage books, and like how that's when it really hit home as to like how much this was going to impact me in my future relationships, and my ability to have normal, healthy relationships going forward. So I started to kind of work through it. And for a few years, I would say I had it like, it kind of subsided. Like it was put on the back burner, and I was able to go long periods of time without engaging in that stuff. And then I got assaulted again first year university by someone that I knew very well, and that kind of just like triggered everything again. And I ended up in a really unhealthy sexual relationship that I I think, I mean, I don't want to say there was like, I apologize to that individual if he ever sees this, because it was completely on me, and it wasn't fair to him at all by any means. And I think there was a level of genuine care for him at first, but it just turned into sexual addiction, and getting that hit and release of dopamine and all like the brain stuff. um, so that kind of came back, and then eventually I just hit rock bottom with that. And there was a lot of, in and out of this whole experience, there was a lot of depression. At one point in my teenhood, I was suicidal and whatnot. Um, but at this point, I just hit rock bottom. I just needed a reason to live that wasn't to engage in sexual activity. So I ended up breaking up with him, and slowly kind of breaking myself out of those habits and that addiction again. And yeah, it was something that took a while to get out of. But again, when it started when I was 3, like how do you don't really, even having that period where things were okay and I had kind of gotten it under control, like you're still, it was almost like I was suppressing it rather than actually having had dealt with it. Whereas after that experience, when I actually saw the impacts it can have on another human being, I think that's when I really actually started to work through it rather than just like suppressing it.
So when you suppressed that, did it move into other areas of your life?
Um,
Not the sex addiction, but the just the manifestation of other unhealthy habits.
yeah, I don't know if necessarily it did. I mean, I think I still had unhealthy interactions with people, but I was it was taking all of my energy and time to suppress it. So I maybe even that in and of itself is an unhealthy habit and unhealthy way of approaching it. But it was like most of my energy was spent thinking about not thinking about it and thinking about the right things, and like um, that kind of like it was taking up all of my energy to suppress it.
So whilst all this is going on, your brother's has serious mental health issues,
Hmm.
and so
Yeah.
so kind of alongside all of that, and I don't know much about your brother's story, but I don't know, tell us a little bit about what was happening at home if you don't mind.
Sure. So, my brother, so there's kind of two pieces to this. So he does have a lot of mental health issues, and then he also has a diagnosis of Asperger's, which was separate from the mental health issues. And I want to be really clear on that. So Asperger's is a form of autism, and a lot of people who have Asperger's live normal, healthy lives. So that's why I want to be really clear that it's a separate piece, and I don't want to stereotype or things get meshed together here. But because of that, growing up, he did require extra, and like even but he didn't get diagnosed till he was a lot older, in grade 10 I think it was. But even though we didn't have a diagnosis, like he did need that extra support from our parents. And so with everything going on when I was young, it kind of started because our parents were focused on him, which makes sense. And I don't like I don't hold anything against them for that. Like he needed that extra care, but because of that, I wasn't getting the affection from my parents. And then when he hit high school and he did get diagnosed, and then things started to rapidly change. And actually, I guess it was a little bit before high school as well. But um, when my parents got divorced, he couldn't really cope, and then he began to get more violent. And I did get like attacked a few times. A lot of like bruises, and like there was just physical abuse there, like for sure. And as he got into high school, he was, hitting puberty, getting stronger. The abuse is getting more dangerous, and he was also having like he wasn't himself anymore. He was having these mental health issues, and he would like have a rage fit and then not know that it had happened afterwards. Like he would have no recollection of it, and which is dangerous when he's like bigger than me at that point. And it wasn't safe for me. My parents were divorced at that point, so we were living with my mom, and she was working a part-time job, so she was always out of the house for that. And she wasn't, I think she was done school at that point. She did go back to school, but I'm not sure of the timeline. But so she was always out working, trying to make ends meet, but it was like minimum wage, so she's working constant hours, and I would be home alone with him a lot. So I got attacked a few times, like near-death situations, and having to go through all of that. Yeah, it was just overwhelming. And again, that sense of comfort and numbing that I would get from like sexual activity, I think that had a lot to do with why I ended up in the relationship that I did and what was playing out there, because it was just a way to escape from what was happening at home, and to escape from feeling like I had no value, feeling like I didn't have worth. Because when you're getting beat up all the time, like you start to feel like you deserve it, and yeah, you start to kind of do that self-blame piece, and like, what did I do to cause this? Or like, oh, I said the wrong thing and set him off, or like those different things. So it was a way of like coping with all of that and being like, oh, here's someone who wants to give me attention, and it's like it almost gives you value, or you think at the time that it gives you that value. So I think that's how kind of the relationship ended up happening as well. And then it was shortly after my brother got kicked out of the house and then arrested that I actually ended up realizing this slowly, and breaking off from that relationship.
And then things with you, I mean, things kind of went from bad to worse with your brother, didn't he? He went in and out of mental health hospitals, and he ended up on the streets, and then he murdered someone.
Yeah. Sorry, was there like more to that question? Or
Yeah, no, I mean, so that I'm just setting the scene because I know where you're going with this, and just how inspiring your story is in the end. And it's kind of because we're going so deep down this hole, but and it goes deeper. I know it does.
Yeah.
But we're gonna, it's not a complete tragedy. The story's not a tragedy, is it? Mm-hmm. But I mean, no. What happened with your mental health after that?
Yeah, so with everything that was going on with my brother, it was a lot to handle, and so kind of going back to when I was in high school, and that I got really suicidal at one point, because to deal with all of this, and actually I guess at that point too, I would have been, that was when I started to suppress the kind of sexual addiction, right? So I didn't have that outlet anymore, and that's when I started to get really depressed as well, and it was kind of right before I had fully got out of that. So I was at that point, like, I had recognized that it was wrong and not normal, because for many years as a kid I didn't know that it wasn't normal to like be engaging in masturbation every day and whatnot. Like, I didn't know that it was unhealthy when I was younger, because I thought like everybody, it was what I knew as normal. So I had recognized at this point that it was wrong, and that what I was doing was wrong, which also, I think in my mind, like, it was kind of like, oh, well, I deserve to get beat up because I'm doing all these things that are wrong. So I was kind of like, what was going on with my brother was feeding off of that as well, which is just a weird dynamic to be in. And then, so that's when I started to try and pull myself out of it, and I realized I couldn't, because it was like a huge addiction. And that was when I got super depressed, and I got suicidal for a bit. And at one point I actually had like a plan in place, but I'm kind of a sentimental person, so I wanted to like say goodbye to everybody one last time without them knowing it. So I had planned it to be like a week in advance so that I could go through that last week and see like the friends that I would see at different weekly activities one last time without them knowing that I was essentially saying goodbye to them. And yeah, it was just a really, really heavy time because I couldn't get out of this addiction of like, and I thought it was wrong, but then I'm getting beat up at the same time. And I was just like, there didn't seem any hope of a better future in any aspect. So that's why I kind of got to that really dark place. But I ended up going to a youth conference, and it wasn't like a lot of people have like these stories of like right before they were going to do it, they get miraculously saved or something happens and it stops them, right? But for me, it wasn't one of those moments. It was actually a few days before what I had planned. And I went to this youth conference with my friends to say goodbye to them one last time. And there was this speaker who shared this story. And it was just, it really hit me deeply at the time. So how his story goes, and I have permission to share it as long as I use a pseudonym. So he was playing football and in net for a football match, and he had stopped the ball and it had jammed back his wrist, and he didn't know it at the time, but this injury had actually caused the blood to stop flowing to his hand. So what ended up happening with this is he just kind of shook it off and went around his day-to-day life. And then he was at a summer camp about a month later it was a religious, I am a Christian, so it was a Christian speaker at this event. And he went to this summer camp, and they had like a night of worship, and he actually dedicated his hands to the Lord, which basically just means he was like, okay, God, whatever you want me to do with my hands, they're yours, and whatever happens, happens. So he had that the night before, and then the next day he went out and was playing basketball. And this one was like not as much of an epic moment. He just kind of ended up trying to do a layup that should have succeeded but didn't, and fell on his hand and actually injured his hand. So he ended up having to go to the hospital and finding out that this previous injury that he had never got looked at was actually, his hand was dying because there wasn't any blood flow to it. So it ended up kind of being this miracle in the sense that if that hadn't have happened the second time, it wouldn't, like, he would have lost mobility of his hand. So going from there, he ended up having to have the operation to fix it, and there was risks to the procedure. Like, there was a risk that his hand he might lose all function of his hand, and it was low, but like it was low for a procedure, but like not super low. And so he ended up going and having the surgery, and ended up that night waking up and he couldn't feel any of his hand. And so he thought he had lost complete mobility of his hand for forever. So he had this moment where he just went and he sat and he listened to worship music and just reflected on God and the beauty of God, and just was like, I'm going to trust you through this, and came to this place of peace that even if he never got to use his hand again, he had dedicated to God, and that was God's choice, and he was just going to live out whatever God had planned for him. So he talked about like this deep sense of peace, and this deep like just comfort and knowledge that God was there for him, and that whatever happened, it was all going to be okay. And this just like unspeakable, unexplainable, like by all logic, he should have been freaking out, but he was calm and peaceful and just felt the presence of God. So from there, it ended up just being that the nerve block for some reason didn't wear off, and it took much longer to wear off than it should have, which is really, really rare and shouldn't have happened either. But because of it, he had this miraculous moment with God. And I remember very clearly him talking about just, if we could just scratch the surface of who God is, like how much more peace and love and understanding there actually is there. And as human beings, we don't actually get to the depths of it. Like, we barely even scratch the surface. And that's what stood with me, and what kind of stopped me from going out and actually seeing my plan through, because I was like, I just want to know that peace and that comfort. And I think it comes back to the fact that like I had been using my sexual addiction for that peace and comfort, and it had kind of worn out for me, and I had realized that it was a dead end. at that point. So seeing that it was possible to access that peace, and that it existed, and that comfort could be there through the divine was just at the time it was more like, okay, I'm going to give you one last chance, God, which I've said a million times in my lifetime, so I don't know how many last chances I give him, but it was like, okay, maybe this is okay to like stick around and see what you have planned for me. And yeah, it just became my prayer from there on out to know that peace on a deeper level, and to get to know that peace, which I wouldn't suggest praying to I wouldn't suggest anyone else praying that, because unless you are aware, because at the time I wasn't, but if you ask for that peace, you're going to have to go through something that brings you to that peace, and the journey is not always the easiest or the funnest. And yeah, because that was from there on out, that's when my brother ended up getting worse, and eventually ended up murdering someone. So I feel like, not that my prayer caused any of that, but it was just like I had to go through that journey to actually understand that peace on a deeper level.
A lot of people approach. There's a couple of points. What I'm seeing, a common pattern in people who find peace beyond addiction is in relation to some sort of spiritual practice, and through surrendering and connecting to some sort of supreme or divine being, which is the same in yoga, same in Christianity, same. It's not different. Some people are categorising Christianity and yoga like they're a different thing, but they're not. They're exactly the same in essence, which I'd love to talk a bit more about this on the theological side of it, because because you have a master's in theology, it's pretty interesting. And I find this super interesting, and just as a wonderful way to remove separationism from all of these things, and find and get to the kind of the essence of all these things. I'm going to try and, it's going to be paraphrasing, but I'm going to try and remember a quote. But it's something along the lines of, if you want to be happy, you must find peace. And if you want peace, you have to be able to resist the urges and sensations of the senses and the mind. And the only way that you can find peace and resist these urges is by having a connection to the supreme or the divine, so essentially being connected to some sort of spiritual reality is the only way that you can actually find peace, and that it will never ever be on a physical plane. It'll never be on a material plane. It will always be. This is why people that would say transcend, because you rise above, because this is where the shit is. You have to rise above into this spiritual dimension to actually find peace, because when you're down in this level, there is no peace. And it's really, really, I mean, let's talk about theology. I mean, you're a master's in theology with a concentration in Christianity. I think that's right, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the concentration is like Christian studies or something like that. But yeah, so I did take a master's of theological studies, and it was through a Christian school, so it does have that Christian lens, but I did intentionally take a lot of courses that were missions based, which basically just means learning about different cultures and different belief systems of different cultures, as well as I took like world religion courses as well in that.
Yeah, because what blows my mind is with all the religions, and I think in Sanskrit they don't use the word religion, they use the word Sanatan Dharma, which means the eternal nature of the soul. So it's more talking about an absolute reality rather than an ideology. It's not an ideology, it's more just the truth and the search for the truth and what's true and what's not. But in religion, in Christianity and in Hinduism's a loose term, but let's just say in all these sects, there is so many different sects of each religion, where it's like how how can you have two clubs talking about the same thing but you're disagreeing? Do you know what I mean? And it's difficult, isn't it? But you've actually said you're more focused on the spiritual side of Christianity as opposed to the conservative, dogmatic, strictly. Explain that anyway. I don't even know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of like for me personally, I find like I connect more with the spirituality side than like a lot of churches get caught up in, since the Protestant Reformation too, even within Christianity, there's so much feuding, not even between other religions, but between different sects within Christianity too. And I just like to focus on like what bridges us together and where's that common ground. And I would say like as a Christian, I do believe in the uniqueness of Jesus. I will state that as well, because that is what I feel makes Christianity unique. But I think there's so much more common ground than people realize, and we get so caught up in focusing on the differences and fighting rather than, well, what are those common grounds, and like where can we have conversations and work together to better the world and to better not just the world at large in terms of like social justice, but also like our individual lives and how we can learn from each other's spirituality. Because I think from my experience, I've actually learned some really deep had some deep connections with God through conversations with people who have very different belief styles than me. And I think that it can be really healthy to have that dialogue, but if we're always focused on fighting and always focused on pointing out the differences, you miss out on those enriching and engaging conversations. So that's where I get a little bit disheartened, is when everybody like especially like Christians are well known for like clinging to their dogma and not being willing to, and I'm not saying they can't have their dogma, like I too have my own beliefs about certain things, and I think that that's what makes your faith your own, so I think it's healthy for everybody to have that. But if you're not willing to even dialogue with anyone who doesn't believe the exact same dogma as you, then it creates problems and you're missing out on a lot of growth.
Well, it's just funny because we had a bit of a conversation, didn't we, about people using religion for political purposes, such as I don't like abortion, let's just use Christianity to be like, I'm just going to use my agenda based on, and I'm going to hide behind this thing and use this. And then you've got people who've used religion to gain wealth and power. And essentially, I mean, this is why sectarianism, I see it as really problematic. As soon as you create a club, and people are like, oh, walk through the door, I've joined the club, oh, now I'm a Christian. Just like that, boom, just overnight. And one of our spiritual teachers was saying, he remember when he was really young, this was like back in the hippie era, and some hippie walked into the temple, all hadn't had a bath in God knows how long, all funny tie-dye clothes and whatever, stinking of weed, and then they basically shaved his hair off, gave him a bath and put him in a robe, and then it was like, oh, there's a monk. You know what I mean? Within 24 hours, boom. It's like that person's exactly the same inside. Yeah. That person is no different. And with a spiritual practice, it's not what's outside, it's what's inside and what's in your heart. Not even in when someone's performing an action, you don't know what that action is. You can't even judge it because you don't know why they're doing it. Unless you really know what's in someone's heart, you can't judge them.
And it's so much about motive, and like even as human beings, I think sometimes our own motives, we don't really realize what's all in our own heart, because sometimes we think we're doing something with good intentions or whatnot, but the more we start to dig out those layers, we have like 4 or 5 different motives in there, right? And so it's like it's really hard to, we shouldn't be judging other people because it's not our place to judge what's in their heart, but also like it's hard enough working on that in yourself. And
one thing I'm really interested in, because I look at the world and I think, what a fucking mess. I look at people's actions and I do, and it's probably not right, but I do think, most people are acting based on self-interest, and I'm not pointing fingers at any particular people of such, but maybe I'm wrong for doing it, but I just feel like, there's just really they're missing love and what love is, and the selfless wonder that it is, and the connection that you experience through it, and not being afraid of losing out on what you think is yours, and all this fear, and I just feel like society needs some guidance, which was provided by religious scriptures, and the problem is people are like, yeah, but it's used to control the masses, and it can be,
Yeah, it definitely,
easily
but
can be, but all the good stuff that you throw away by throwing that out and rejecting it.
mhm.
I mean, you'll be able to, quote some wonderful things from like just the teachings of Jesus that are like, I can't argue with that. That's a good thing. I mean, just reel some off. I mean, obviously, I think of like love your neighbour like your brother as being like, do we do that for a start? I mean, you can't argue that that's not a bad thing. I mean, it's great,
Mhm.
isn't it? Love
Yeah,
everybody. I mean, reel
yeah.
some off, because I bet so many of the good ones.
Well, like the one that sticks out in my head right now is like when he was talking with the Pharisees. So the Pharisees were like the religious leaders of the day. And you were talking earlier about like when we change someone's outside appearance, it doesn't change who they are. And so he was talking about how like you wash the outside of the cup, but the inside of the cup is dirty.
Yeah,
And so and it was interesting too because like I really like that one because it talks about it's directed at the spiritual leaders of the day, and I feel like when we get caught up in all this dogma and getting it right and the fractions within even Christianity, and that what we're focused on is not so much the inside of the cup but that outside appearance and who looks like they have it right and looks like they have it all together, rather than that love that Jesus talked about like so often. I really love to the story of the woman at the well. So there was a woman at the well. She was a Samaritan woman. Jews and Samaritans didn't talk to each other, and Samaritans were like kind of, for lack of a better term, they were like mixed Jews, so they were of mixed descent. Um, and so that's why Jews didn't hang out with them, because they saw them as like not real Jews, quote unquote. um, so, and also in that day and age, men would not talk to women when they're alone. But Jesus is at the well and he's waiting for his disciples to go get food. So he's all alone at this well. A woman comes and she had been in and out of unhealthy relationships her whole life. She's had like 5 different husbands, and the man that she's living with now is a 6th, and they're not even married, which back in that day was like, whoa, what are you doing? Um, so Jesus starts up a conversation with her just by asking for a drink, and she's like, "Well, you're asking me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink?" And he's like, starts talking to her about how he's actually the one that has living water, and she's like, "What are you talking about? Like, you're out of your mind," type of thing. And they actually have this whole conversation, and she ends up saying, "Well, like when the Messiah comes, then he'll know those things." And Jesus reveals to her, and I think she's one of the first people he reveals himself to as Messiah, and she actually gets to go back to her hometown, and she's there in the middle of the day because obviously she doesn't get along with the other women in her town, so she's there at the hottest hour, which people wouldn't be getting water culturally at that time. So you know that the town doesn't really like her, and so Jesus actually sends her with that message back into the town that the Messiah has come, and she tells all the townspeople, and they come and they interact with Jesus, which is really cool. Um, yeah, because just like his love towards women and seen out in his actions and how he interacts with women is phenomenal in the Bible. And I also really love the fact that like the cultural boundaries that were broken in that story as well, to just love this woman and tell her that like, hey, you might have been through all this crap, but like you're cared for and loved, and to just show that love of God. And yeah.
There's one that I like. I think it's something along the lines that anyone who praises himself will be humbled, and anybody who
Mhm.
humbles himself will be praised. And I love
Yeah.
that. It's just the
Yeah.
absolute. In a world now where people think that pride is such a good thing, and
Hmm.
I don't know where the line is between pride and arrogance. I don't
Yeah.
know. You
And
know what I mean? I just don't know. I don't know if there is one.
yeah,
Humility
and
is beautiful. It's just
there's
amazing.
there's also prior to that in scripture too, in Proverbs, it talks about pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall, which in North America we've kind of co-opted that into one phrase of pride goes before a fall, but destruction is like such a more hard-hitting word than the fall part. But yeah, pride is like ultimately the thing that like it seems like a small crack at first, but it destroys the whole vessel, I think.
Mm,
And
yeah. It's interesting, and it is amazing where your path goes, because as someone that used to be an atheist, it's quite interesting to be sat here talking about this, and it wouldn't have been certainly not that long ago that I wouldn't have been capable of having this, or even comfortable to have this conversation and put it out public. But I'm just realizing that, you know, I'm happy to talk about this, and I think that it's important and essential. And it's not like I'm not, I don't think that you need to become a Christian or a Hindu or a Buddhist or any of these things. I don't, because it doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything. It's like you can walk into a church and get baptised, and it does fuck all, nothing. Do you know what I mean? It's like what's in the heart, and what you're saying about the cup and the cleaning, what Jesus was saying, but cleaning the outside, not cleaning the inside, and it's exactly the same as what's written in the Vedas about, it's described as like you're like a budgie in a cage, or a bird in a cage, and people spend the whole time polishing the cage, and they don't even remember to feed the bird, and the bird starves and dies, and that's you. You're the bird. Yep. You're not the cage. So this thing, it's not it's not who we are. We're inside. We're spiritual beings. So if you don't feed yourself spiritual food, you can never be satisfied, and that's why you have that cold, dark, and empty void inside. Because you're not feeding yourself you're literally starving yourself, and that's darkness, that's ignorance, that's complete drug addiction, fatigue, confusion, mental health problems. So I'm pretty strong. You don't need to be a Christian. It's not important, but you do need spiritual food.
Yeah,
which is what the great saintly people have to. And I'm sorry, I'm ranting on a little bit here, because I didn't come to this through. I used to make jokes about Jesus. I just make jokes. I was one of them guys. You know what I mean? And complete disrespect towards the whole thing. Complete disrespect towards Christians. I thought they were mental. You know what I mean? I've come from there. But then I came in through a yoga path, because yoga's totally more acceptable in the West. And then it's kind of like a real subtle, gradual process of uncovering. And then all of a sudden, it's just like this click, and it's like, holy shit! Like, what he's saying is the same as what everything's saying. And it's like, you know what I mean? Like, you don't even need to focus on the personalities, even though I think it's helpful, but you don't. It's nice to form some connection with these transcendental personalities. And I get it, and I get it now, which is amazing and mind blowing. And I'm sure even people listening to this will just be like, "Holy shit, what are you on about Jesus for?" But it's awesome, and once you do have that connection to these transcendental personalities, it just kind of opens this doorway to what you can only describe as like feelings of life, and it gives you some sort of spiritual strength to overcome absolute bullshit like addiction, which is what I'm saying. It's like with all these addicts, that something that's so common is that they all have to find and live by some sort of spiritual process, including Christianity as a spiritual process. If doing the cleaning the inside of the cup.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like, kind of going back to my story with that too, like when I was trying to suppress the urges and that, and like do that on my own strength, it was, like I said, it was taking up all my time and energy, and like it was basically it was replaced the consumingness of the sexual addiction. It just became all-consuming, suppress it. Whereas like after kind of partnering with God, and like when that came up again later in my life, having that spirituality to work through that with, it's just a different And that's not to say that it was necessarily like easier. I don't want to say it was easier to deal with at that time, but like it was just a more peaceful approach to dealing with it, and a more like I didn't feel alone in it, and I didn't feel like that judgment of myself wasn't there as much too, right? Because it's so easy, like judging other people is bad enough, and then if we're judging ourselves too, like how do we make that progress? And I think there's a difference between accountability and judgment of self, because sometimes we talk about those interchangeably, but I think they're actually two separate things.
I've had some really interesting conversations recently with atheists and people who are like radical atheists. But the funny thing is, they're like, I'll tell them. I always come from the point of like, this is my experience. This is what I have experienced. This is my perception of what's happened and made differences in my life to me being happy, me getting off drugs, me all this stuff. And then they've just pretty much been like, "You're mental, mate. You're delusional." And they're like, or like things like God definitely doesn't exist. But that's, like with two peas in a pod, me and any atheist that says that, it's kind of like, I've had the experience that there is some kind of higher being that's definitely got my back and helped me out greatly, and, I've just been absolutely blessed in my life. I've been so lucky, even when I've just been doing, like, making all the wrong choices, I've still been blessed. And to say that something doesn't exist is equally as mental or delusional, because it means that you're omnipresent, you're everywhere, you've seen everything, and you know that there's nothing, because finding something to show you that it doesn't exist isn't possible. So it's like, well, you can't prove it doesn't, and I can't prove that it does. You know what I mean? Not to you.
In order to prove that it doesn't exist, you would have to be omnipresent and omni, like, all-knowing as well, whichever that one is. But like, that would then make you God in order to. So it's like, yeah.
Well, this is the theory in the kind of like what we're talking back to yoga. It's like, or what our spiritual master will teach. It's kind of like any atheist is like it's not conscious of that, but in essence they believe that they are the center of everything, and that everything is just for their enjoyment. And I've been there. I've been there trying to use everything, thinking that like my happiness was the most important thing that there was, and that I should be happy and having a nice time and receiving pleasure at all times, which is why I ended up a drug addict, because I just wanted to be, having like me. It's just me and my experience, and 7 odd billion people on this planet believing that they're the center of everything, trying to just have a good time and exploiting everybody else at the moment. And it's quite frustrating realizing that you're not that important and that you're not that powerful. And do you know what I mean? And there's a lot of people that have. And
I think that's why it goes back to, like, you were talking way earlier about like surrender and that element of like giving up control, and that's why it's like so central, because essentially when you give up control, you're admitting that you're not the center, right? So I think that ties very intricately together.
And that attempt at domination is just so miserable, because it's just absolutely devoid of love. There's no connection. There's no sense of like it's us. It's just completely me and my experience and me. I'm going to be the most powerful. I'm going to build the biggest building. I'm going to, you know what I mean? All this stuff, and there's no sense of, like, I care about you as much as I care about myself, and that the beauty that comes in that togetherness, and it's just it's hard as well to give up. It's hard to give up once I realised the gig was up, and it wasn't all about me, and it wasn't about me being happy, and that my life wasn't the goal of my life wasn't to go on consecutive snowboarding seasons, and sniff horse tranquilizer to my pleasure, and you know what I mean. Like, there's such heavy consequences to these selfish desires, and I realised the gig was up, and I was so frustrated, and I was so anxious, and I had to give it up. I just had to be like, it's not about you. I tried. Don't get me wrong. I tried my hardest to believe that it wasn't. I really tried, but it just the more I tried and the more I struggled and tried to fight against it and be powerful, the worse it got.
Mm-hmm. And I think like that it has such a limiting view too, like when you're focused on what I can get out of situations, and that it like you don't think everything's instant gratification. There's no long-term vision, and there's no looking towards the future. It's all like, what can I get right now? And there might be some of the future in terms of like, but like it's harder to think long-term when you're constantly wanting that gratification.
Yeah. And just to sort of like be like, what was it that made the real difference in your life, that kind of saved you from hell, you know, from absolute darkness and suffering? What was it that kind of saved you from that?
I think when I realized that what I've been through can help someone else, and can stop them from, like, especially with the topic of suicide as well, like if I'm here, maybe I can show someone else their value, and they'll be here for longer. Because, like, for example, that night that I was at that youth conference, if that individual didn't exist, I probably wouldn't be here right now. Maybe something else would have stopped me between then and when I had it actually planned, but I don't know that. And if that can have that much impact on my life, like my experience, my testimony, my sharing what all these things that I've been through and connecting with people through that can show them that they have value, and that if it stops somebody else from doing it, then I'm happy. and finding purpose in that, and the fact that I've lost one of my best friends to suicide as well. So with that, it's like, if I can keep somebody else here and somebody doesn't have to experience that level of pain of knowing what it's like to lose someone in there, then everything that I went through in order to be able to help someone stay around, and to find, not just stay around, but to find fulfillment in life and actually thriving in life, and succeeding, and not just sticking around to not kill themselves, but to see like they have value, and they can impact the world, and the world needs their voice just as much as anyone else's voice. And so they can find that value, then everything that I went through is worth having gone through. Like every time that I got beat up, every time I was near death, every time that I felt super depressed, it will all have been worth it if somebody else can see their value because of that.
It's amazing. You know, all the conversations that I've had recently have just been... it just blows me out every time. Because you know, I just can't even comprehend that level of shit. I can't even get my head around it. I know that my life's been quite tough at particular times, but like, it's just nothing compared to what people are telling me in their stories recently. And it's just like, you know, when someone gets through it, and it's just so inspiring when you hear that someone's got through it. And I know that there's so many points in your story that people will be able to relate to. And I think that it will be surprising to me how many more people that relates to than I can imagine. I've had a lot of stories, a lot of conversations with people about when them being sexually abused when they were younger, but mostly males, and I've known them and I've grown up with them, and you'd never know. And I think that the more people that get the strength to come out and discuss that, you know, the better, because it's, you know, it's not something to be ashamed about, is it? It's like,
No, yeah.
It's as common as, I don't even know what, but it's like really common, like like really, really common, which is disturbing. But at the same time, I think that the more light is shed on this situation, and the less that it gets swept under the rug, the better. Because and I'll just say, so Katelyn's going to be on the Break the Chain Addiction Support and Recovery group. So if you go on Facebook and you type in BTC Addiction Support and Recovery Group, Katelyn's going to be on there. And if you find her, and just drop her a message, and if you want to, would you be happy to talk to people about, you know, all this sort of stuff? Because you know, it's all right, isn't it? It's okay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like,
Yeah,
I
and
certainly don't judge anybody, you know, for any of this stuff, because, you know, I just don't know anyone's story really, and why or what, and, you know, it's all right. I mean, thank you so much for talking about this, Katelyn. It's, you know, it's been really, really interesting and educational for
yeah.
me, and I hope for a lot of other people as well. Where else can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm just gonna jump back for a quick
Okay.
second to just say, yeah, like if people want to message me for sure, I love having conversations about that. Just with the certification I'm with, I do have to say that I'm with the Certified Coaches Federation, so I am not a psychotherapist of any kind. So I can't provide therapy, but I can provide a lot of support and whatnot in other forms. So I just have to be cautious with that.
Yeah.
In terms of where they can find me, I am on social media. I have a Facebook page as well, Katelyn Townsend life coach practitioner. I have a website at katelyntownsend.weebly.com, so it can be found there. Yeah, I think if you go to my website, all my social is linked there, so it might be the easiest route, because I do have like Instagram, TikTok, everything else, so it's probably just easiest to go to my website.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for talking about it and coming on today, Katelyn. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it,
You're more than
and
welcome.
it's a huge blessing to get to share, and I hope that it was a blessing to all of your listeners as well. And
I'm sure it'll
yeah.
be super valuable. Thank you.